Welcome back, everyone. I am so excited right now to be with Bonnie Grossen and Kurt Engelmann for another episode of this podcast. How are you doing, Kurt? Let's start with you. Where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Eugene, Oregon, world headquarters of NIFTY, the National Institute for Direct Instruction.
Love it. What about you, Bonnie?
I'm calling in from Portland, Oregon. I'm retired, so I'm doing little hobbies like still doing DI stuff.
Still doing DI stuff, huh? You can't get away from it. Kurt is a familiar name for fans of this podcast, but we haven't met you. Bonnie, maybe you kind of introduce us to yourself and like how you got into DI.
My biggest event with DI was developing a model that was implemented in California in 2000 to 2008 in middle schools, a school-wide middle school model that was one of four that were adopted. And that kept me very busy with a lot of DI consultants that were very experienced from around California. And then implementing in American Samoa and Florida and a little bit in Kansas. Plus, I am the chairperson of a group of elementary DI schools, 6 schools in 6 different districts. I've been their chairperson for 12 years. They've been in existence for 19 years doing full immersion, direct instruction. And I'm the author. I worked with Zig developing the higher level language programs, reading and writing levels E and F, essentials for writing for high school kids to meet the requirements of exit exams that we had a decade or so ago, and then the higher levels of language for the Reading Mastery Program. And I was a high school teacher for 15 years.
If I could just interject, Zach, Bonnie is one of the treasures in the direct instruction world. We have several, but she is one who has really done it all in terms of program development, working closely with my father, implementation, research. She does it all, and I'm just so glad to be here with her and you for this episode.
Awesome. And this episode is all about the role of school leaders and implementations. And we're going to be talking about sort of what NIFTY does and what it's been doing for many years in terms of like what constitutes a high quality implementation, what leaders, what the role that they play in that process is. Maybe another episode, Bonnie, we can talk about all that writing, because I've recently started to experience a little bit of the writing process of what it means to be an author, and it's absolutely crazy complicated and complex. So let's get started, shall we? So my first question for you is, what is your role in supporting DI implementations, specifically NIFTY's role in supporting DI implementations? Kurt, over to you.
Okay, great. And I do want to say NIFTY is one of the implementers. There have been other implementers in the past, and Bonnie had an organization called CARE, and you can remind us later what CARE stands for. NIFTY was founded explicitly by my father to help schools and districts get the most out of the DI programs on a school-wide or district-wide basis. And so that means implementing the model for core instruction, and with a concentration perhaps the first year in reading and language, to not overwhelm the teachers with all the programs right away. We often start off with reading and language and then move to math and spelling the second year at the elementary school level. Bonnie has a slightly different model we can talk about later. And one thing we've discovered is if we do direct instruction, reading and language the first year, by the end of the year, lots of times the math scores go up. Why? Because the kids are able to read and understand the mathematics, the word problems in particular, but directions and everything. So it's always good to start off with reading and language. NIFTY has worked with a variety of schools and a variety of locations, from inner urban Baltimore, Philadelphia, Atlanta, to the whole Isle of Guam. We've done implementations in remote Australia, really quite a lot of variation in terms of whether it's a rural school, urban school, et cetera. Some very small implementations in Nebraska, with more of a concentration on the elementary school level, because that's really where you can do a preventative model. But we've also worked at the upper elementary, middle school, and a high school or two. And there doing the remedial model, which is always important for those students who are behind.
You sent me a few different articles to take a look at that sort of exemplified some of what's possible when you have really high fidelity and strong implementation support for direct instruction. You will see as my guest, I'm going to share my screen. I have this this is coming to us from Eastern Nebraska. Maybe you could kind of speak to what we're looking at here.
Right. It's a set of bar graphs showing performance over time for students, third graders, on the Nebraska state assessment from 2009 to 2012. And it has bar graphs for Schuyler Elementary, the school that we were working with there, and then a bar for the state. And in 2009, there was a considerable discrepancy, over a 10-point different discrepancy in terms of the percentage of kids on average who passed that, either at Schuyler Elementary or at the scale of Nebraska in general. And over the years, you see this steady increase in the percentage of students who passed the test, until it started off below the 40% of the kids, the third graders, in 2009 at Schuyler Elementary. By 2012, it was 86% of the students. So a gigantic gain that outstripped the gains made at the state level, because on the average, it went up by about 10 percentage points at the state level over those same years. This is an example of what is called the cohort effect. I think my father liked to use that term, which is when you start an implementation, especially at the earliest grade level, then you'll have this wave of higher performance that takes place over the years. So as those students start in kindergarten and they're all or just about all reading, finishing that program, and building a firm foundation for work in first grade, second grade, third grade, as they go through the grades, the scores are getting higher and higher and higher each year. And it's great to watch. And I'll just say this also, it means that quite often the gaps in schools we've been working with, like in Atlanta and elsewhere, there'll be fifth graders who are performing at the kindergarten, first or second grade level. And so we can help accelerate their performance, but to see the maximum performance, wait for those kindergartners to come up. So it can take 5, 6 years, et cetera, before the maximum performance, where virtually all kids are at grade level, and out of the continuing kids, many of them above grade level in performance.
I can think of a few reasons why that would be too. I mean, as you go through, multiple years, the teachers are getting stronger, the kids are getting more used to the routines, because if you listen to our last episode, we talked a lot about behavior with Jeff Colvin. The kids are getting used to kind of structured learning, and also as you do that sort of implementation training, different teachers are sort of learning how to kind of use the data, effectively. It just seems like it kind of snowballs is what you're saying.
It does snowball, but to get its maximum, it's really important for those early grade levels to get that acceleration. In this school, there were about 90% of the students were Hispanic. So it was a high poverty school that had various challenges and able to have their kids excel.
I'm going to put these in the show notes for people that are interested so they can check it out. So don't worry. If you want to pause and go ahead and click into the show notes now and check out what I have there, feel free. But here I've got another one. Tell me about this one. This one's telling me San Francisco.
Yes, in San Francisco, my organization, CARE, Center for Applied Research and Education, was an official implementer in middle schools, and we were having a great deal of success and had a lot of publicity. And the 4 district leaders from San Francisco asked us to implement in their high schools, because they were feeling like feeder schools to San Quentin, and they wanted to change that and get their kids higher in reading and higher in math, and the performance levels of the high schools were a disaster. And this chart shows the first year in red when proficiency levels on their STAR testing were very low. The socioeconomically disadvantaged only had like 13% of their population scoring proficient. ELL were only at 12%, and special ed was at 0. Then we implemented direct instruction for 4 years, and each bar shows 2 years in succession. And the growth from the second to the fourth year was quite dramatic. The socioeconomically disadvantaged group had about 56% proficiency. The Hispanics were at 42%, and the ELL were at 43% proficient. Enormous growth. The district people said, well, that area has changed. We've got better demographics. They're just doing better. And those 4 district leaders retired, left, and there was a vacuum of leadership there. And a new EL coordinator came into the school and throughout the direct instruction. So by year 6, you can see that it wasn't demographics that was explaining the difference. When the DI model left, the scores regressed, in some cases quite dramatically, with Hispanics back down to 22% and the ELLs back down to 20%. There was especially a campaign against using DI for EL students. And this school was very much EL. The state of California has requirements for what you have to have in your curriculum in high school. And San Francisco School Board got special permission or was able to make it so that the high schools could take courses that were more appropriate to their needs. So instead of having to read The Great Gatsby for a year, the kids could be placed in a direct instruction program to learn what they needed to learn. In many cases, they had 2 and even 3 periods a day of direct instruction in a high school. And that's pretty amazing. Special ed, I should comment, they came and threw out DI out of the mainstream, out of the core programs, but special ed people had found something finally that worked. And for year 6, they kept on using the programs, and the scores of the proficiency levels of the special ed kids grew still in the 6th year to 30% or 29%, because the teachers had something now finally that worked.
It seems like a tragedy a little bit that you saw this success, and then once you're just starting to sense that success, then you say, well, they're successful enough, we don't need the thing that's bringing about the success. Is
exactly
what I'm hearing.
Very frustrating. I tell you, we've been through that a lot. So, we had all kinds of teachers teaching DI then, not just the language arts teachers. And often I find those teachers of other subject areas are actually more receptive to DI than language teachers because they've sort of been brainwashed by their program. But one high school teacher said, this is the first time I feel like I've actually taught. I can see the kids learning in my classroom with these programs, and I have never seen that before in my life.
I really do recommend people that are listening to this, go back to the episode with Ann Baum and Randy Salter. I thought that was such an amazing episode, but they were at times doing DI just without really telling anyone. It was just sort of going rogue with DI, and seeing that success. You can't forget that. So many stories of people taking these programs like to their international school in Thailand, or like using it with the neighborhood kids, because once you see it, that's just kind of what happened to me. You just kind of catch the bug a little bit. Well, I'm gonna keep us going, because one of the questions I really have for you is a term, Kurt, you've mentioned this to me several times, full immersion. That there's a different type of implementation than maybe what would happen in just maybe a single classroom in a building, but like a full school-wide immersion model of implementation of DI. So what is that? And like, what are some of its advantages?
Yeah, the full immersion model of direct instruction is designed to immerse students in DI as much as possible for the DI programs that are published and that we implement. So at the elementary school level, it's reading and language the first year, like I said, math and spelling the next year, with schedules and practices that make sure that DI is effective for all of the students. So having a schedule that includes 2 reading periods a day for all students in kindergarten and first grade, and any students who are performing below grade level expectations in second grade and above. they get to have a schedule where they get that second dose. And the idea is to prevent failure by accelerating, by finding those gaps in language, et cetera, from the very first day, and then accelerating their performance as much as possible. Get them reading, because one thing we know is there's a lot of vocabulary and comprehension that comes about through reading. So the earlier we can get all those kids reading, the better. It's interesting because in the full immersion model, so we don't want competing programs either in terms of time or in terms of the approach that could confuse kids. And through elementary school, it's not necessary to have another social studies or science curriculum or program, because there's so much of that content that's built into the grade 2 and up reading mastery programs. The kids are learning all kinds of things about the solar system, about flies, about the different historical epochs, how gears work. It's just tremendous. And there's a resource Nancy Wolfson put together, just a compilation of all the different topics that are studied, that kids learn to mastery in those programs. So that's a really big, important part. We have a document called The Essential Elements that goes through and describes what's needed in addition to schedules, making sure there's a coordinator, whether it's a literacy coordinator, math coordinator, someone else who can act as the lead coach. They usually will teach a program for at least half a year, because if they don't, then they're not able to give as much sophisticated feedback. Make sure there's supervised practice sessions, data, in the programs, they're the mastery tests, checkouts, cumulative tests for math, and that those data are collected weekly, analyzed with a weekly problem-solving session with NIFTY, or if there's another consultant giving that direction there. And then there's a whole capacity building part of it that I won't go into any detail.
Bonnie, maybe you could speak to this. Like, have you experienced sort of the full package version of DI at a school where really like there were no competing programs? It sort of permeated through all aspects of the learning program.
Well, our elementary schools, our 6 DI full immersion schools, don't have any competing programs, of course, and their performance is above the other schools in their corresponding districts. In contrast, in the middle schools, when we were implementing math, it was hard to convince them to not use a different math program. And in the schools where we implemented the Connecting Math DI, the results were better than when they had both math programs. It's important to stay focused on what the DI is teaching and not distract them with other.
And if I can interject, Bonnie is the author of the REACH system, which was very big in the late 1990s, 2000, which basically talked about how to coordinate all these programs at the middle school and high school levels. And they include.
Yeah, that's what was adopted in California. It had to be created in order to be adopted and implemented and funded by the professional development and the stipends and everything that went into implementing those programs. And there were 6 levels, 6 points where students could enter into the REACH system. And every single student was placed in the REACH system, which was language arts and reading, not math. But many schools also wanted to do math. So even the highest groups were placed at entry level 6, and they were learning high level direct instruction content, how to reason logically and how to write complex essays.
Well, I'm curious when this sort of school-wide model of DI was like invented, and like what purpose kind of does it serve? We've already mentioned that, you just don't want to confuse the kids, but I'm sure there's other potential advantages as well. Maybe you could speak to that history, Kurt.
Sure, because Project Follow Through, that was the full immersion model where DI was the core instruction across the curriculum there. One could argue, going back to the Brighter Engelmann preschool, actually, that was the full immersion model. But there have been other pieces with regard to data analysis and coaches training that developed along the ways. But that is the original vision of the creators of direct instruction, to have DI for core instruction for all students, where the interventions are actually done in the programs, either in terms of providing more time or more practice on certain elements. Very rarely do you need to go outside of the program in case there's students who are too low for the entry levels of the DI programs. That does happen, but it's really quite rare. So when you take a look at the follow-through results, quite a few people cite that as proof of explicit systematic instruction in general. Well, it did involve, of course, explicit systematic instruction, but it was a very specific model in which you had program managers, coaches, essentially, that were on site every day providing that coaching. So a whole model that NIFTY has adopted and several other implementers too.
You heard it here because people here are fans of the Project Follow Through story. I think that was the biggest episode, by the way, this podcast. So there you have it. So the Nifty model is the Project Follow Through model. And I've been hammering this outside of this podcast myself too, which is that perhaps the explicitness was an element, and then there's the design and the materials, but really that wraparound approach to the coaching and implementation and the video analysis and the data. This was some sophisticated stuff at the time, and I'm sure you've built on it over the years as it's sort of modernized. What are some of those kind of, I don't know, adjustments as the years have gone by?
Well, I'll name a few, and Bonnie may have some in mind. The data collection and analysis had to become much more virtual because we didn't have there's not a nifty person who lives on site. We've had a couple of those very fortunate times in which the implementation manager, nifty implementation manager, is living in close proximity to the schools. But we have the data collected. The teachers record the results of the mastery tests, the checkouts, et cetera, on lesson progress charts and student test summary chart. They're different charts, independent work also. Those are sent to the NIFTY implementation manager and project director. They look them over. It's all scanned or uploaded into a Dropbox, and the consultants look through those in advance of a weekly problem-solving session. So that's one of the things that has changed over time. Another one is a series of in-services. So they're video in-services on how to correct errors, how to do the thermometer charts that are there to encourage kids as they're doing independent work. There are a few of these that can be done much more independently. That wasn't the case before. And then we have in-service follow-up forms. So whenever there's an in-service done, whether it's on active monitoring of independent work or making sure there's enough think time, there is a sheet that the coach can go around and use to do observations to make sure that the teachers are actually applying it into their classrooms. Because, overall, there's only about 12%, 10, 12% of in-service content that actually makes into the classroom, much less consistently. Well, every in-service that we provide is there for a reason, based on observation or some other need that we know that they're going to have. And so coaches go in and make sure that teachers are doing fine with it and able to implement it fully. And so those are some of the things that we think are additions to the model that have helped out over time.
Well, I was just going to say a big change came in the late 90s when everybody in California was realizing that, the politicians and parents were realizing that not just the special ed and the socioeconomically disadvantaged, but also the children of college-educated parents were not doing well on tests and couldn't read. And that's what gave birth to the school-wide middle school model. Before, it had been a remedial model. And plus, we had a demonstration school there. So when you're implementing school-wide, you have all the faculty involved too, because one period a day would be direct instruction. And every teacher was teaching a direct instruction class. So that meant training a lot of people. So I developed a method of training where we'd go into a model school and we would train for a couple hours and then have the teachers go practice in classrooms where the kids were already following the signals, knew how to do it, and they could feel like it was already greased up for them and practice teaching lessons in the classroom with the kids. And I remember one kid saying to one that was struggling, the kid said, "You just read the blue words, we do the rest." And it was very convincing. They want to say, people want to say, oh, kids hate DI, they feel punished by it and whatnot. But then they go into a class where these kids are bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, feeling successful, and it just knocks all those myths in the head. You don't have to spend too much time arguing with them.
I definitely have experienced that where it's like the buzz in the room, the crackle to life of everyone kind of rowing the boat together. I'm curious how this connects to like kind of a renewed interest and emphasis in schools around MTSS or multi-tiered systems of support. Is a DI sort of implementation model or immersion model, is it compatible with MTSS?
I would say yes, it is, although it doesn't have necessarily the same formal tiers that, in fact, every group becomes its own tier to a degree. So all students are placement tested. They are put into the programs that match their skill level, and they're given the time that they need to be successful. That can differ for different groups. As we said, in the elementary school level, if kids are projected to finish the grade level program, second grade or above, they don't need to have a second reading period. And the same is true with the remedial model at the middle school level or upper elementary school level, where kids who are in decoding A and B1 and several years below reading in corrective reading need to have a second reading period. There's an analogous arrangement with DICE, direct instruction spoken English. There are some interpretations of the MTSS that say, oh, for your tier one, you don't need to have everybody in the same basal reader, the same core instruction. You can differentiate that. For the DI programs, everybody gets the same set of programs, or they get the same approach, but they may be in different levels of the programs and different lessons in the programs. So their needs are being met that way. And for those kids who are struggling more, they will get more attention. Smaller group size also, because when kids reach the grade 2 level of the program or B2 in decoding, then it can become whole class instruction. Still homogeneous in terms of the skill level, but whole class.
And I'm already thinking like because everyone is placed by placement test, it sort of resolves an element of differentiation for the higher performing students that I think is not accommodated at all in any other, no matter what people are saying, unless you basically have gifted programs, very few people are really helping these students to accelerate. So how does the DI kind of the school-wide DI model help higher performing students?
Bonnie, do you want to take that one on first?
Well, at the full immersion model, they're definitely at grade level, and the DI programs teach them content that, if they are on level making progress, which they are if they've been there since grade K, then they are well ahead of their peers just by having mastered the DI content. For example, from our charter schools, our six DI schools, the kids go to the middle school and there's no math class for them. They've already learned everything that's taught in middle school math classes. So, they're higher performing, but they learned it by being steady in the direct instruction programs.
Because I'm just thinking of like my daughter who keeps getting brought up in this podcast. she started us off on the first episode, but I keep thinking of my daughter. She comes into kindergarten already knowing how to read, thanks to Teach Your Child to Read, right? And 100 Easy Lessons. And she's at that place where every book she picks up from the free neighborhood library, she's just consuming literature, just reading and reading. But she starts day one of kindergarten, and we're starting with whatever the first sound is in whatever program it is that at the very, very beginning, like all of that. There was no addressing those needs. And so I'm picturing this being an absolute game changer for kids like her who can start based on placement.
Right, the homogeneous groups. But that's one thing the education establishment that doesn't like is homogeneous groups. It feels like you're tracking kids. But with the school-wide middle school model, every kid was in a reading class. And so they all knew we all have reading from, the six different entry points. And the ones in the lowest group, hardly anyone was aware of which group they were in. Everybody had their quote reading class. And so even though they were grouped heterogeneously, it was much less stigmatizing than if low kids had been pulled out and put into a resource room.
Yeah, we found that if you have flexible grouping and you're looking at the data, then you can accommodate kids who come in at a higher level, like your daughter, and congratulations, that's terrific. Or those who all of a sudden the light bulb goes on, the penny drops, however you want to say it, because there are a lot of kids who will be undertaught, who never, undertaught is not an official term, but it basically means they don't have a learning disability. Just no one has ever systematically explained to them and showed them how a particular topic works. And so we've had some students who, by looking at the data and their performance and observing them, have been able to skip them up several years. When we were working in Atlanta at a few middle schools there years ago, there were all the kids there placed at least 2 years below grade level. Sixth graders, eighth graders, they were all placing into corrective reading. And there were some sixth graders who placed into decoding A, which is a pre-primer level. And there was one boy and girl in particular who placed into decoding A, but for them, the light bulb just went on. And by the end of the school year, they finished the grade 4 level of the program. So they went up, they finished the equivalent of 5 different levels. So that's what you can do if you're sensitive and you let kids move along at the pace that they demonstrate that they can do.
Something to do with the skip schedule in some of the programs where like you can like sort of use the teacher's guide or Nifty helps kind of analyze that where you can almost go maybe a third or a quarter speed faster or almost double speed, but basically by systematically skipping certain lessons based on the responses of the students. Am I correct about that?
Yes, I did that when I taught high school. But you have to have very reliable attendance. One of the things about these large groups, when you've got 25 kids in a DI group and it's not resource room, then you have kids who are absent and having, just going one lesson after the other just sort of keeps the whole group together. The ones who are absent have a little time to catch up, and it's not a huge penalty. It keeps them trucking along.
Let me ask about that because a lot of people do ask me if you're teaching to mastery, what do you do with kids who miss out, right? It's sort of like convenient how some of the basals that are in most schools, they kind of just move on with random topics that don't build on each other, right? It's kind of makes it convenient to kind of keep everyone in the program and if you don't teach them to mastery, but if you really care about them their performance on the mastery test and them actually learning things so you can move up step by step in the progression. What do you do with students who miss 30 days in a year, so at some point?
You have to regroup them. By teaching every lesson, you have quite a bit of tolerance for an absence now and then, but a kid who is chronically absent is going to have serious problems. They got to be there for you to teach them.
And that is a perfect reason why to have a school-wide implementation and why the school leaders are so important. Because if it was an isolated classroom that has that student gone for 30 days, well, and then the teacher has to somehow accommodate, they can't accommodate that student at their skill level. But if you have that school-wide implementation with other groups at different levels, you can have that student join another group where they're at her skill level.
Just by like giving them a placement test or basically replacing them is what you're saying.
Yeah, regrouping.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a perfect transition into talking about school leaders. So I've been working with school leaders quite intensely. Some are more involved in instruction than others, and it's sort of seen, I think, these days that really teachers are all on their own, right? You give them a program, they're meant to teach it the way the in-service taught them like 2 years ago, and just kind of if, deal with it. And if they don't like it, they can kind of bring their own creativity to it. I don't know. What is the role of a school leader when it comes to like, making sure that DI is successful and that the kids are progressing as they should?
Well, the school leader is absolutely critical for making sure that the implementation is set up correctly and that it meets the needs of all the students. So I can't recall working with a site in which there hasn't been a really involved, supportive school leader to make it successful. There have been some cases in which teachers have formed a very important part of that, but it's the school leader who ensures that there's adequate schedules, that there are the ratio of um, the staff is correct, because for those smaller groups you need to have more staff. You may need to make sure they're trained in the proper level of the program, etc. So the school leader is absolutely critical. For my book, Direct Instruction, Practitioner's Handbook, one of the things I did near the end is I have two chapters on what are the pitfalls of a DI implementation. What are the pitfalls for teachers? What are the pitfalls for school leaders? And I interviewed implementation managers with a lot of experience, and they all just stressed how incredibly important it is for the school leaders to be involved, to be knowledgeable, and to be supportive, not just from the beginning, but before the beginning and having a role all the way through.
And Bonnie, like what have you seen from very successful and effective leaders in the schools you worked in?
The school leader can deal with the excuses that are going to come up from some of the people. There's always going to be somebody among the staff that is a naysayer, and the district leader, who's the boss, can deal with that more effectively than an outsider. And then school leaders are very important for keeping everybody focused, emphasizing the importance. Implementing direct instruction is not fairy dust. It's not easy. It is a lot of work and paying attention to details. I would say that, because it's so logical, once you get sort of the hang of it and the method and say, oh, I've experienced learning. So yeah, this all makes sense. It all makes sense once you get going. So it's not just so insurmountable, but it is a lot of work. It's not fairy dust. And a district has to be focused on doing it every day and keeping it going. And the district leader is really essential for that.
I've heard of a version of sort of a immersion type of implementation for DI in which really the groups can get so small in some cases that like the PE teachers teaching reading mastery, like we have the principals teaching it, right? It's just all hands on deck. Everybody's teaching to get these kids up. It seems to me that the school leader needing to really advocate and be persuasive about that type of model would be important, because most people just kind of, I teach this subject, this is what I was hired to do, and leave me alone to do my thing. And you'd really have to be that type of transformative leader who's saying, but look, like, the buck stops with us and they have to learn how to read. And these are our values and this is our mission. Let's go together. Yes, the PE teacher is teaching reading.
I want to say something. Yes, our schools are 6 DI full immersion schools. When a principal leaves, we don't hire from outside. We hire someone from inside the staff. We have the intervention specialist who does the small groups, who is the person who knows all the programs the best of anyone in the school. There's one in each school, and that person becomes one of the candidates for the principal position. And so we never have to start with somebody who really doesn't understand the model. And then they also are the coaches for the teachers, and they do all of that training before the year starts and coaching in class as the year progresses. That works really well.
That's what you call an instructional leader, someone who knows all the programs, knows what's required, has the techniques, has all the background to be able to really truly lead. That's a terrific model, Bonnie.
And you mentioned about like getting hands-on with the coaching. Like if listeners will know, I did an episode with Tamara Bressi where there's a little clip in there of me, embarrassing maybe, but teaching some teaching some corrective math. And it's like nothing I've ever experienced, where it seems like it's so DI, right? Where really being very meticulous and nitpicky about the details of the signaling, of the pacing, of my expression, of my position. And these are just delivery techniques. There's the use of the program, the previewing of the materials. Is that the school leader's role? Like, are they there to be in classrooms and to give that type of more direct and actionable feedback?
They can be in the case of the Arthur Academies that Bonnie leads, where you have someone in that position who has that expertise. In the schools that we work with, as I said before, we want to make sure there is a building coordinator, sometimes called assistant principal of instruction, et cetera, who will learn those techniques over time, but can't be expected to have them in the beginning. But the principal just needs to make sure that all the big structures are in place and that the staff is receiving all of the training and coaching they need. Doesn't need to know all of those things in other models if there is a building coordinator who's going to learn it over time. So there is, you didn't attend one of the pre-service program trainings that we do, but that's where all the delivery practice takes place with the different types of formats, first doing it without corrections, then with corrections, and seeing how those formats change over time, the scaffolding falls away, etc. Those are the type of things that your DI expert coach will be able to provide.
All right. Kurt starts with the schools that don't have any experience with DI. So you got to have an outside expert coming in there. Our schools have been doing it for 19 years, quite a different thing. But even the principal doesn't know much about DI, needs to go in and observe those classes every day. I had a good principal said when I asked, just sort of informally, how many times, how often you visit a classroom? And the super principal said he goes into every single classroom 4 times a day.
Wow.
I'm happy if they go in every classroom 1 time a day, but you can do that. Just do your rounds. I know, good principals do their rounds once or twice a day. Just walk around the hallway and go into every classroom. You don't have to stay there and write up an observation. Just go in and make a positive comment about how learning is happening and how smart the kids look, and then go on to the next classroom. Just, a little positive feedback shows their support and doesn't take a whole lot of time.
One of the forms that we came up with is inspired by Jeff Colvin, was the 2-minute observation form that just looks at engagement. You go in and you see, are all the kids actively engaged in the activity that's intended by the teacher? Not just that they're sitting in their seats and not creating problems, but yeah, those quick in and outs have a very strong place.
One thing I'll have to say about how you trained me, and I've said this to many people, that I feel like Engelmann discovered cognitive load theory before cognitive load theory existed, right? And it was like the whole idea of like breaking this down for me so that it was manageable for me and didn't overwhelm me as a teacher. Like, I'm of course have all of this worry of like I want to get better, and but I have all these extra responsibilities, and I'm a dad, I'm a teacher, and I have all these classes that are not DI, and it was just sort of like, we're going to start small, and I'm going to do it for you, and you're going to kind of do it with me, and I'm going to bring you along, and I'm going to praise you. Like Tamara was constantly like saying, kiss your brain to me, right? And pat yourself on the back. And she said, of course I'm doing this because I'm still an elementary teacher, but it actually motivated me, right? And so I just love that. And it's a great model for coaching in a time when coaching is kind of sometimes doesn't happen. So I love that. My next question is really around sort of expectations when it comes to like a DI implementation. Like, what are some sort of realistic student performance expectations, if you go down this route, and especially if you take on that kind of full implementation model?
Well, I'll talk about the elementary school level, and Bonnie, if you want to take it for middle school, high school, that'd be great. At the elementary school level, it's really simple since Reading Mastery Signature Edition came along with the reading and the language tracks. So we expect that students who start DI at kindergarten or sometimes pre-K, that they will, at a minimum, finish the grade level program that corresponds to their grade level. So kindergartners will finish the kindergarten level of the program. When they get to first grade, they'll finish the first grade level of the program. When they get to second grade, you guessed it, they finish the second grade level of the program. That's for continuing students at a minimum. And what we found, even in the most high poverty schools we've worked with in Baltimore and elsewhere, is that half of those continuing kids, by the time they get to grade 4, they'll be done with the grade 5 program of reading mastery, and we'll have to find something more advanced for them to do. Understanding U.S. history, which is a textbook intended for the middle school level, sometimes novel studies, etc. So that's with continuing students. For students who transfer into the building, and this is something that becomes more of a problem when you get that cohort effect, is your grade 4 kids who've been continuing at such a high level, then you have other kids coming from elsewhere into the school transferring in, and they don't have those skills. Well, then it just depends on where they place and how far we can help accelerate their performance.
Well, I think that says it all. We expect to catch kids up who are behind with an accelerated program. I mean, DI teaches more stuff faster than other programs. That's why the examples are all thought out. Teachers aren't hemming and hawing thinking about what examples to use to teach a concept. You can just zoom through the content, and teaching more in less time catches kids up.
Absolutely. Something you mentioned, I just want to seize on it because I haven't been able to bring it into this podcast yet, was something that I don't think a lot of people know about reading mastery, starting at level 2, I believe, which is how much content is taught systematically. Like, we're talking about knowledge. Right now, the big buzz on the street is knowledge rich. And what I think people have misinterpreted, or maybe it's a misconception around DI, is that it's all foundational reading kind of skills, maybe like comprehension skills only, or maybe conventions in writing. And they don't realize how Engelmann was teaching knowledge infused into these programs in a way that I don't think anybody's really ever seen. Kurt, maybe you could speak to this, because I've just been wanting to talk about this for a while on the podcast, and it's never really come up, and you mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, I just happened to open up my book to page 90, Building Background Knowledge for Reading Comprehension, and it has some examples there. And I can just tell you the stories that take place, and you can imagine that all of the knowledge is pre-taught for these stories. So a toad named Goad, well, the kids learned about, before ever reading the story, they learned about toads and amphibians, learned the difference between frogs and toads, the life cycle. Nancy learns about being small, and so there's a whole bunch of things they learn going down to the molecular level or even lower through that before they read that story. Herman travels the world. That's about a fly that gets in an airplane. The airplane goes here in San Francisco, Japan, etc. And so kids are learning the geography beforehand. Those are just 3 examples of a list. There's one on the time machine where they go back and learn different epochs. They go to about 1000 AD in Scandinavia. They go to Egypt. They go into the future too. So if you want to find out what the future is like, well, I just open up, I think it's Reading Mastery 3, and you can learn what that is. Yes.
Yeah, the first 2 levels of reading mastery are teaching kids to read, learning to read, and then from 3 and up, well, there's sort of a little overlap, but it's reading to learn. And if Zig had his way, he would have probably made all those levels focused on information and knowledge. The last 2 levels, though, have literature, because people wanted literature to be a part of the reading curriculum. That was a requirement from the states. But there's so much knowledge in levels 3 and 4.
And they learn to write. And Bonnie is the co-author of the upper level writing track for Reading Mastery. And so they learn quite a bit through that too.
Yes, they do research on the internet. They learn about the dance bees do to communicate with each other and how that language works. And I have to write an essay about it.
I just think it's important to talk about it because I think right now it's sort of I think a lot of people just think we just kind of I don't know give them a PDF on a certain topic and we kind of just talk about it in class that's basically what teaching knowledge is. And the programs in reading mastery, as I've got my hands on them, infuse logic and writing, and they pre-train and pre-teach before you get the text. And when you get to the text, it makes sense, right? And you're talking about it. And it's just it's a level of design that is so sophisticated. It's hard. I sit here drawing arrows of how all those things end up being infused into a performance that the kids end up doing that I just don't think we're getting right in the knowledge debate that's happening right now. So I thought I'd bring it up. The final thing I wanted to ask about is like, what advice do you have for schools and districts who are just starting a DI implementation, including some of those common pitfalls we alluded to earlier?
Well, you need external support if there's no expert in your school. You need coaching and you need outside people to train you, or one person at least. And you need to stay focused. You need to focus on it as the most important thing you're doing this year and next year. And if you add things later, don't do it till you've got reasonable momentum with your DI implementation. What else, Kurt?
In the book, a big part of it, I divide up the stages, if you will, or the set of tasks for school leaders into three categories: setting up the implementation for success, monitoring, like Bonnie was talking about, and then responding actively. So those who are just starting out is to look at the setup, make sure to placement test the kids, figure out what the schedule is like, etc. A lot of things that really should have been done months ago. But as you alluded to, Zach, there are various pre-implementation, pre-setup steps to take also in terms of making sure the staff is informed what DI is about. There's a great video, Why is Reading So Hard, for instance, that is one of the videos that we recommend that teachers watch. Going and visiting a school where they're implementing direct instruction. Go visit Arthur Academies, or at the conference, we're going to be honoring 3 different schools or school systems that have been doing DI for 25 years or more. They're all located on the East Coast, North Carolina, Baltimore, and Boston. So there's information out there. Go seek it. When you go to implement, make sure to set things up well, and then monitor, because if you expect something, you should inspect.
I suspect that what maybe a district would do is go look like let's take the existing structures we have and just kind of try to shoehorn DI in. And what I'm hearing from you as I kind of put all these pieces together from what we talked about is really you need to take a step back and you need to look at all of the elements, and you need to look at how the schedule and time and the organization, all of these things, they need to be adjusted because the conventional or traditional approach to organizing a school may not, whatever you have in place may not be the in the best interest of the kids or of the teachers or of really driving performance and learning as quickly as possible.
And many of the myths need to be attacked. It was sort of a mindset adjustment. Go and grab the teacher's guides for the different programs and look, here is where the content is. Get a book that explains how to do it, etc. But there is a lot of that work that should take place so that teachers are ready to give it their all when it's time to implement DI.
Love it. So we've learned so many different things. I will put, of course, all this contact information in the show notes along with some of these resources, so you can kind of all these things we talked about, check them out. And if you're looking to like start a pilot or something, right? You can just like reach out and be like, we want to do this right, right? So we reach out to Nifty and reach out to Bonnie and talk about sort of what's the journey, because these two folks they know a lot about how to do this. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, Kurt and Bonnie. It's been a joy. I'd love to do it again. Any last things you would like to say? Kurt, maybe start with you.
I guess I would just say to the listeners that if you do pilot it, please implement with fidelity And if you do it, I'm getting goosebumps. You will see tremendous things from your students, especially from those who you didn't think could perform as well as they could. You can never really anticipate which students are going to take off, and there's just a great joy in seeing kids being taught at their skill level and building that foundation of success.
Yeah, well, I'll say it's hard for so many people to even imagine how a scripted program could work with kids. But if you do it the way it's supposed to be done with the, like you've learned, Zach, the right signaling and stuff, and even just in a few days, you'll start to see the kids learning right in front of your eyes. Like that high school teacher said, I've been teaching for 20 years and I never saw kids learning before I taught this program. And
what was I doing?
well, it was in secret, I guess. He never saw the effects of what he was doing on the kids learning. But it is amazing. I learned DI after I've been teaching this and that. And that's what I was a failure as a reading teacher, and I thought I was a smart person, and I got DI, and those kids that had alcohol fetal syndrome, we know now, they just Zoom, they were all readers at the end of the year. It was just amazing. And so I stuck to DI. Why bother with other models of instruction just to be someone who knows all the models of instruction? I only needed DI after that.
Perfect. And with that, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to the podcast. Give it a 5-star rating. Spread it around, give it to a leader, because we've talked about school leaders a lot. Pass this to them. They'd love to, hear it on their commute and consider different options for your schools. Kurt and Bonnie, take care.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Zach.